Welcome virtually to our annual Berger Lecture, a Sydney Berger Lecture. I'm the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts, and it's my pleasure to welcome you in this virtual format to a long tradition here at the University of Southern Indiana. Each year we remember and honor the legacy of Sydney Berger, who was one of Evansville's most respected attorneys, and was also a guest lecturer in the College of Liberal Arts, teaching classes on civil rights or civil liberties, and he was very active in the community on labor issues and civil rights organizations, and he taught here for 20 years. When he passed away in 1988, he had done a lot to help the little guy, so to speak, in town, and each year a guest lecturer comes and presents on a theme of civil rights or civil liberties to celebrate the values that the Bergers cherish. So I'm really thrilled that we are able to do this remotely, given all that we face in society at the moment. I'm just really thrilled that we have a speaker of this renown today. And the topic is really salient and needed, particularly when we think about what's going on. So without further ado, I just want to turn it over to my colleagues in the Social Work Department to introduce our guest speaker tonight.
Well, our keynote speaker today is Dr. Gena McClendon. She's the Director of Voter Access and Engagement and the Financial Capability and Asset Building Initiatives at the Center for Social Development at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. Her work focuses on issues related to voter suppression and civic participation of marginalized populations. If you have any questions for the speaker, please post those in the Q&A section, and there will be time at the end of her address that she can speak to your questions. Please welcome Dr. Gena McClendon.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be able to do this and be here today. I'm really excited about this, a little nervous, and let's just get to it. So the name of my lecture is Electoral Justice Meets Democracy, Challenging Racism and Systemic Barriers Through Research and Practice. And as Dr. Turner said, I'm at Washington University, and I lead this initiative that I'm going to be talking about some of the work that we've done, but I'm going to start with giving a little bit of I'd like to sort of recognize Mr. Berger and his fight around civil rights, and just making sure that we understand that civil rights and voting rights, how they're interconnected. And so I have a couple of quotes here. So the Civil Rights of 1964 laid the foundation for the Voting Rights Act in 1965, but it also addressed nearly every other aspect of life in a would-be free democratic society. And so from that perspective, what I want you to think about is the interconnectedness between civil rights and civil liberty and voting rights. They all go hand in hand. Maya Angelou said, "It is impossible to struggle with civil rights, equal rights for Blacks without including whites. Because equal rights, fair play, justice are all like the air. We all have it, or none of us has it." And that's the truth of it, and it really is. And then Thomas Paine said that voting is the right upon which all other rights depend. And so my interpretation of that is that it's important because of systemic racism, or any ism for that matter, because if you deprive of someone of their right to vote, then you're depriving them of everything in life. It's just that simple in my mind. So just quickly, what I'm going to talk about again is the importance of touch on democracy. I'll talk about racism and systemic barriers to political participation. I'll talk a little bit about voter suppression and intimidation. I'll talk a little bit about the research that my center did that kicked off our initiative, and have a short discussion about strategies in promoting a culture of voting, and I'll explain that more later on. And then I want to just talk a few minutes about election results, because that is a big conversation now. So working definitions, these are it. When I talk about democracy, this is what I mean. Ordinary people have the right to participate. When I talk about electoral justice, I'm basically talking about access to voting rights. Here are some assumptions that that I've made with this body of work. And one is the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act address distinct forms of racial discrimination. That's first. Voting is practicing democracy. That's another key assumption that I have. And then voting is not a partisan issue. So what I'm going to be talking about is just democracy. It's about being able to vote, being able to have a voice. It doesn't matter who you vote for in terms of what I'm talking about today, but it is having that right. And so John Payton, a civil rights attorney with the NAACP, once said that democracy thrives when it's practiced and not prevented. So the what and why of the Voter Access and Engagement Initiative, sort of based on these ideas that democracy is in crisis for me. So when I first started doing this, had the idea to want to do this work, it stemmed back to my participation in the 2008 election when Barack Obama was running for office. And I took some time and volunteered, actually took off from work to go volunteer at a poll place just to pass out water and things like that, because I knew, everybody knew, that it was going to be, a lot more people were going to be able to vote. Well, where I voted, it only took like an hour to vote, but where I went to volunteer took several hours. I didn't understand that, had no idea that that existed. You know, we had the Civil Rights Act, we had arrived, right? So nobody should be in line for hours and hours, but that was the case. And so that's one piece. The other thing is looking at our democracy now in terms of it being in crisis, and all of this is rooted in racism, voter suppression that are with targeted strategies towards Blacks and people of color. We're talking about economic and financial inequality. All of these things are rooted in racism, even climate change. And if you're studying social work, I know you have talked about in your classes about the impact climate change will have on low-income families compared to other people. Then there, of course, is social media, which I'm sure you get a lot of. The other thing, I want you to look at these two pictures. One, they're both in black and white. I did that intentionally. But one of them is with John Lewis, who's getting hit in the head, the one at the bottom. And then, so that was like in 1960, in the early 60s. The other one is recent. A lot really hasn't changed. Think about that. The differences in, even though the circumstances were different, but the situations and the way people are treated haven't changed in all of these years. So I have a thing. So in thinking about this, you know, I want you to think about what's at stake. And so I'm going to show you a short clip. This is from a documentary called Rigged, the Voter Suppression Playbook. And I hope everyone can hear it.
I love the vote. It was instilled in us to vote. My grandma raised me up and my sister up to vote. You know, when we turned 18, that was all right. The address when I registered was 7660 Bridgewood Circle.
I'm gonna have you go and stand in that line so they can update you.
Okay.
All right. Next voter, please.
Hello, Michael Evan Hires.
You'll just verify that your address and information is correct, and if you'll sign at the bottom for us, please.
There you go. Thank you very much.
I need a picture ID.
I got an old one until
See what you have. Karen, is this your address? You have something with your address.
She told me I could not vote at all because I got to re-register because I'm nowhere in that system. They're not making it easy at all. It's tiresome, yeah.
Yep, we got to clean the rolls up one way or another. I happened to stumble across the Phantom Voter Project. I started looking at my neighborhood and started finding what I believe to be a bunch of fraudulent registrations and started investigating them. It's about time we turned the lights on in the kitchen and started cleaning the cockroaches out of here.
When I found out that I was purged off the rolls, and I was highly upset about it. Because, like I said, I grew up seeing my family vote. I know it's my God-given right today to vote, and I want to vote.
The board found probable cause to go forward on a total of 3,564 voter registrations challenges, all of which were submitted by Mr. Michael Hires.
Yaritza, Burgos, Robin Bruns, Christopher Carmichael, Tina Carmichael, Justin, Christopher Carter, Rachel, Cheryl Carson,
Again, that's 3,564 of those challenges the board found probable cause on to go forward.
This is a big win, really, as far as the numbers go. Good golly.
This meeting is adjourned.
So before I go on to the next slide, the one guy, I don't know if you caught this, but he single-handedly went through and was able to get 3,500 people purged from the voting rolls, one person. And many of the people that he got taken off the rolls were ultimately put back on because the reason he took them off wasn't justifiable. But there are laws on the books that allow this, to do something to either challenge or in some way you're able to get people kicked off of the voter rolls. But anyway, so in thinking again about our initiative, I like to think of this in terms of the poem that Maya Angelou wrote, Rise. And so what we do is we do research to influence practice and policy. We work through the premise that this should be an inclusive democracy, looking at what are the threats and what are the opportunities to make things better. How do we support advocacy and engage efforts to support and create a culture of voting? What should that look like? How do we bridge this idea that your vote matters, that you matter, and bridge that and connect it to everyday life? And then engage and train a new generation of voter protectors. And that new generation of voter protectors, in my mind, are social workers. And it could be anybody for that matter, but I especially think of it in terms of social work, because social work has been on the front line in terms of defending the rights and helping people. So it's a perfect place for me, in my mind. And some of the other things that VAE does, we help recruit for election protection and poll worker. We actually hosted a march, something that we call the Good Trouble Voter Awareness March, which is happening in major cities across the country. We've worked with other organizations, or we are working with other organizations. We have hosted webinars, we do that. We've taken some of the documentaries and had discussions like the documentary Rigged, and had panel discussions. And all of this is sort of centered around helping people to become more educated about voting, about their rights. And then you cannot do this work without having a relationship, establishing a relationship with local election authorities. So again, I want to give a historical context to this, and I want to start with the Constitution. So when the Constitution was ratified in 1789, the only people that were given laws or that had the right to do things were white men. African Americans were considered 3/5 of a person, so they weren't considered citizens at all. Um, the states determined the qualifications to for the U.S. representatives to vote, and this sort of started the whole system around census. I'm going to go down to, so in 1865, the Civil War is creating the 13th Amendment. So we're no longer slaves. Reconstruction Act added voting rights for African Americans to the state constitution. But here's the thing that I should have said first is that there is nothing in the Constitution originally that spoke to that at the federal level there are laws around voting. All of that was given to the states to determine. That's why every state has a different set of policies and rules and way in which they organize their electoral process. Then it took the 14th Amendment, even though the Reconstruction Act came on, it still didn't give African Americans the right to vote. So another amendment had to be done in order to give African American citizenship, right? And even though the Civil War was over. Then in 1870, the 15th Amendment gave Black men the right to vote, not women. Women didn't get an opportunity to really vote until the 19th Amendment is when women were given the right to vote. But that was only white women. It wasn't Black women. So there were literacy tests, all kinds of things. And an example of a literacy test, let's say in Alabama, for example, is taking a jar and they put marbles in it, and then you have to guess the number of marbles in that jar. Now, what that has, first of all, it's impossible to figure that out. And number two, what does that have to do with being able to vote? But those are the policies. And the 24th Amendment abolished poll taxes because at some point you had to be, not only did you have to be white, but you had to be a landowner. And then there were other things that you had to do in order to, you had to pay for in order to be able to vote. But it wasn't until 65 when the Voter Rights Act became the key piece that allowed everybody to vote. There were key provisions in here that protected people from voting, particularly in the South. So it was a great thing. People were registering and voting by the handfuls, just thousands and thousands. There were other key policies that passed. We had the National Voter Registration Act, which basically means that when you go to your local Department of Motor Vehicles, they are legally supposed to ask you if you're registered to vote, and if you're not, you can vote there. If you're changing your address at the DMV, something like that, that information is supposed to go directly to your the Secretary of State's office, and your address should be updated. Does it always happen? In Missouri, it wasn't happening, and the Secretary of State's office was sued for that in Missouri. The Voting Rights Act, while it gave more access to voting for people, it had this piece in there about being reauthorized. So, as social workers, you'll understand this. It's interesting how anything that has to do with social justice or racial justice or social policies, those things they have to prove that it works. And so that's part of the reason of this reauthorization. But then in 2013, there was a case in this little bitty town, Shelby County in Georgia, that challenged a section of the Voting Rights Act. And that particular section had to do with protections from the federal government to make sure that people can vote. And what those protections looked like were this: anytime something changed within the voter law, it had to be sanctioned or given approval at the federal level. Well, that was challenged and taken out. And it started because there was this one polling location, the maps had been redrawn, congressional maps. And so it put this one polling place in a different place. And so they challenged being able to move this poll place. Well, it went to the Supreme Court, and so the Supreme Court pretty much said, "Hey, you know what? We have a black president now. There isn't any more discrimination. We can just, everything is good." So they ruled it unconstitutional, and there were some other protections that were in there for people that were taken out as well. Let's see, where am I with time? So I'm going to go ahead and play this. This is sort of and essentially what happened, how the devastation that took place after this ruling was taken out. So that gave a probably a better explanation about that ruling than what I was able to give. So just talking a little bit about voter suppression, it mentioned some of the things in that clip, but this is, these are some other types. Felony disenfranchisement, gerrymandering is packing and cracking maps so that some areas will have more representation than others. And it has happened on both sides of the aisle. Challenging laws, purging, I gave you an example of that already. Voter restrictions, like voter ID laws. Some of you may be wondering, well, why is having an ID an issue? I have one, everybody shouldn't have an ID. Well, it's just not that simple, because for many people, especially if you're poor, they don't have access to money to pay for those things. And so if you live in a rural part of the state, or even in a major urban area, if you're on the bus, you've got to travel to the DMV. That's one thing. Then when you get to the DMV, you have to have money. And then if you have changed your name because of marriage or divorce, now you need that documentation. If you don't have that documentation, you have to pay for it. DMVs are typically not open after normal business hours. So now you may have to take a day off of work. There are some people who, older people who don't have a birth certificate. They don't have one. In Mississippi, if you don't have a birth certificate, you literally have to find somebody who knew you or knew your mom when you were born to attest that you are the person that you say you are. So it's just a number of things that causes problems on why people can't get IDs. I have on the either side of this slide something about felony disenfranchisement, and I don't know, some of you are probably aware of what happens or what's been happening in Florida. So Florida is one of a few states that did not allow ex-felons, returning citizens, the ability to vote. When they passed the law and said, okay, the people overwhelmingly said yes. Once you've done your time, then you should be able to vote. They said yes, but the legislature came back and said, well, I tell you what, you may be able to vote, but we want you to pay all your fines and all your restitution before you're able to vote. So imagine this. If you went to jail for something, let's say fraud, and it's $5,000 and you spent 3 years in jail, do you really have $5,000 to pay those fines and fees? So some people see that as a modern day poll tax. This is the story of a guy in Florida. His name is Desmond Meade. He sort of like single-handedly spearheaded this thing to help returning citizens have the right to vote. Oh, I forgot to play it. Okay.
You got to vote as if your life depend on it, because it do. For African Americans, it do. If we don't vote, then we end up having to live in a situation where there are policies that cause us to be gunned down in the street like animals.
That's the most offensive thing I've seen in the last 30 years.
What's up, buddy? All right, all right. Today is the last day of early voting, right? To where people can vote anywhere, right?
We want change and leadership for brown and black people in this community.
But according to this list, these people haven't voted yet. Your vote is our voice. Bam, let's rock it. That's how we do this thing. One vote at a time. We can't vote because we got a record. Just because we can't vote, that don't mean we got to be silenced, right?
That's right.
It is so easy to get a felony in Florida. They say you come to Florida on vacation, you leave on probation. My name is Desmond Meade. How you doing, brother? Your vote gonna count today, bro. Yeah. If I wasn't, my knees wasn't bad, I'd just carry on my back, you know? So what's up, Facebook family? He is a registered voter, and he's allowing us to take him to the polls to go and vote. We're on the trail, Papa. We're gonna make sure everybody who wanna vote get an opportunity to vote. We got an issue now. What's up? They turned him away, and the supervisor of elections erroneously turned him away. You know what it is, man? Driver with a suspended license. This was back in '93. And we think that once you do your time, you get the right to, you should have the right to vote.
A plea bargain is not justice, and that's what we want. That's what we're looking for.
You guys like my dad, man. How in the hell you gonna do a black man like that? How you gonna do a human being like that?
To break every chain, break every chain, break every chain. To break every chain.
That's a frustration, man. Everybody else get to vote. We can't vote.
So like I said, change did come, but they ran across some other issues with the fines and fees. But what has been happening is that you have different people like Mike Bloomberg out of New York who gave like millions to Desmond Meade's organization to help people pay their fines off. There were about 67,000, I just saw this on the news a little while ago, 67,000 ex-felons have registered to vote in Florida now, which is a great opportunity to feel part of what's going on. And the average fine, when you take all of the ex-felons back then, I think it were 1.6 million at the time. The average fine is about $1,500. So people from, not just Mike Bloomberg, but others have been contributing money to pay those fines for people. Voter intimidation in real time. The things that I have listed here are things that just happened in the last week or so. Florida, just yesterday, people were receiving threatening emails telling people either you vote for Trump or we're going to get you, right? In Minnesota, the attorney general there was checking into these groups that were hiring armed guards to be at the poll places in Minnesota. In Michigan, there was somebody that was doing robocalls specifically to people in urban areas, threatening them and telling them if you go vote, they're going to have your personal information and it's going to bring up old warrants and they're going to be waiting for you to arrest you. Your credit card companies are going to come after you. They're going to come after you if you didn't get back your vaccines, mandatory vaccines, that kind of stuff. So, I mean, this is real. So let me talk a little bit about the research that we did. So in Missouri, we have all of these things that are against us when it comes to, and us, I mean that us in terms of being able to vote. No early voting, we don't have same-day registration voting. We have excuse-only absentee. This year, the legislature expanded the law to include COVID and then also mail-in. But both of those two expansions that would help people be able to vote, they expired December 31st. Go figure. So anyway, a few other things, and I'm just gonna kind of get to the actual things. So we, based on what I told you earlier about how I was concerned when I went to go vote and gave my, did some volunteer work at another part of St. Louis. In St. Louis, let me just say this, St. Louis is extremely segregated in terms of, where people live. Blacks typically live in North St. Louis and North St. Louis County. St. Louis has two counties. You know how most urban cores will just have one county, but St. Louis City is a county by itself, and then St. Louis County, as they refer to, are the suburbs. But anyway, so we recruited masters. Our social work school is master and PhD level. So we recruited students from there. There were we also have a public health school. We also have social policy. And then we had a few undergrads that participated. They had to go through the whole institutional review board process in order to participate. We selected 20 poll places. And our hypothesis is we basically wanted to know, and if you know about how research works, you have to prove, whatever you hypothesize, you have to be able to prove it. Our questions basically were, are there any kind of barriers when it comes to infrastructure and voting processes and things like that when you're actually trying to exercise your vote? And then this is the results, and tells a quick story about the study that we did. So that study was quite revealing. I think the things that stood out mostly to me was the police presence, higher police presence in Black communities compared to the other communities. And when we made our decision with the 20 poll places that we did our observations, we were able to observe inside and outside with cooperation from the local election authority. Let's see what else sort of jumped out at me. I think that's sort of the bigger things that happened. So I want to talk, I've got about 10 minutes. I want to talk a little bit about the culture of voting. So, and the reason why this is important is because if just having conversations with people and asking them, do you vote? If you vote, why do you vote? And overwhelmingly, what I got from those that vote is if they vote because their parents told them that they needed to vote, or their parents took them to the poll place, or so they got their culture, they got their understanding, they got the importance and the value of voting from their parents and not from school, not from anywhere else. Because if you think about it, where do you get it? You get a little bit of it. If you don't get it at home, maybe when you're in junior high, you might remember the 3 branches of the government, and the president and the legislative branch and the judicial branch. But what kinds of conversations generally does the country have? Not to mention just in African American communities, but how do people understand that there is a direct connection between what they care about every day and voting? And people have enough to do just to be able to survive. They don't necessarily have time to think about voting because maybe it's because they don't understand the connection. Maybe they don't understand that who your mayor is or who your local councilman is determines how much money is in your school district or your state, the school board. All of these things are elections, are part of everyday life. And so how do we build that culture of voting? And so I ran across this YouTube video by a young rapper by the name of Yellow Pain. So for you younger folks, if you like music, I think you'll get this. For those of us that are a little more mature, what I typically do is I put on the closed caption so I can read what they're saying, because sometimes it moves pretty fast. I can get the beat, but I may not be able to understand exactly what he's talking about. But I'm going to play this for you.
Enough electoral votes, more than 270, more than enough to become the 44th president of the United States. He will be the first African-American president of the United States.
I've been broke all my life, but I kept hope all them nights. You see business in my city? Yeah, they closed all them twice. I was just riding down Salem, all them damn potholes I can't drive. I know y'all can fix it faster, but I know y'all won't try. Don't nobody care about us. Wrong vote. Voted for Obama back in 2012. I remember that's when I had hope. He was saying, yes, we can. And everybody got less food stamps. And when I turned 21, I was still broke. I'd never vote again. I don't think I ever had a president make my life better. Did it all on my own. Ain't no politician ever do a nice gesture. I don't even know the mayor's name. I ain't never seen her one time ever. Tell me how she gonna help the city. What I'm supposed to do, write letters? What I'm supposed to do, blame Trump? He ain't never really gave a ain't nobody raised minimum wage. None of these jobs pay enough. I think they just wanna keep us broke, cause they ain't putting none in place for us. This how all my people feel, but we gotta learn. We complained enough, let me change it up. Everything I just said, everybody I know think the same way. See, they don't wanna see us vote, and we never do, so we see the same thing. But all our votes really do count, and they'll never really let it show. So now I'm finna break it down, cause if I don't, you would probably never know. First thing first, you know back in middle school when they taught us, it was 3 branches of the government. We forgot it when we got older. It's the judicial, the legislative, and executive. But all we know is the executive. That's the mayor, or the governor, and the president. Now none of them 3 people make no laws, they just be checking them. The laws come to their desk and all they do is say no or yes to it. So when the news station try to tell us that Barack Obama couldn't put us on. We was all salty at Obama when it was the Congress members all along. We gotta focus on the legislative branch, yeah, they the ones that make the laws. Yeah, they the ones write how much food stamp money you get on the card. But when people that wanted to help us wanted the job, I know they probably lost. Cause we ain't even know their name, we ain't know their face, we ain't know it all. So the Congress or the State House, that's legislative, they make laws. So what we want from the president is what they do, okay y'all? See, they election every 2 years, but we don't ever even go to those. The Congress, they can raise minimum wage, but we ain't even really know it though. So you know how back in 08, when we all voted for Obama, we was all supposed to go back in 2010 and vote for the Congress. Cause they the ones make child support laws, they the ones choose if your kids at school get to eat steak or corn dogs. The State House make the court costs. So if the country failed, then you can't say it's them, it's your fault. Cause y'all ain't know to vote for Congress members that was for y'all. And they don't gotta leave after 4 years, and we just let them sit. See, they don't wanna tell you this, they want you to focus on the president. Now the third branch is the judicial, that's judges. They the reason why John Crawford and Trayvon ain't had justice. So when Meek Mill got locked up just for popping willies, we blame the judge and not the city when they let her get voted in. Cause they ain't know who to vote against. Imagine life on the other side. Roads better, schools better, everybody get their license back. Grocery store food better, custody of your kids back. Homeless people get new shelters. If we gon' fix the U.S., we gotta start with them 2 letters, me and you. Somebody told us that the government wanna keep us broke, but the only reason why those people in the government is cause we ain't vote. And I ain't talking about the president, I'm talking about the ones we ain't know. See, they was gonna try to keep it low, but it's gonna hurt them when they see the polls.
Every time you stay home, someone is making a decision about you, making decisions about the air you breathe, the water you drink, the food your kids eat, and how much money you bring home every 2 weeks. So every time you sit out an election, every time you don't show up because you think it doesn't matter, someone else is happy that you didn't show up, so they can make that decision for you. Vote.
Okay, so I hope you got the point of that. And the whole point is to vote, to understand the reasons why. And so as you're going to go out into the world in your professional career, just remember, you know, some of the things that we're talking about, because as social workers, one of the things that we don't want to do is make judgments about people. And so to me, it's real important that you understand not only just the issues that people have to deal with every day, but when, you know, when you go out in the world in your professional practice, whether you're doing clinical or research or policy, whatever it is, just remember that it has nothing to do with intelligence or anything like that. We have to teach people, you know, what it is that they need to know so that they can make informed decisions. So when you tell somebody, oh, you should register to vote, we have to be able to tell them why and what they can do. I'm sure you know this, and if you don't, you'll learn it. People want to be involved in something. Most of them do. They just don't know what and how to do it. So as future social workers and whoever else is listening on this, find something, whatever it is that you're going to do, find your niche with it, find your passion with it, and then add that voting element to it, whatever it is that you intend to do. So I'm sorry, I'm preaching. So what can you do to fight democracy? These are just a few things. One is just have a plan. And I know you've seen commercials about this if you have an opportunity to watch television, but make a plan. And not just the basics, just, you know, making sure you're registered to vote and all that kind of thing. I'm talking about having conversations with your family, your friends. Make sure you know who's running for office. You heard what Yellow Paint said. We don't know who these people are, and especially with judges. You know, in Missouri, we have partisan, we have nonpartisan judges. So every election, there's a slate of nonpartisan judges that we have to vote on, and nobody knows anything about them. And there are ways to find that out. I'm not sure what the story is in Indiana, how that works. But the other thing, as I mentioned, just, you know, sitting down and having conversations with your friends or family. You can always go to places like the League of Women Voters. They always have information about candidates, about ballot initiatives. And that's another thing, you know, just make sure you know what you're voting on. Don't walk in there and say, oh, I don't know what to do and just not vote, or just vote on the president. You have all the down ballot issues and people to be concerned about. And there's always places you can go and call to get help. In particular, this 866R vote is an excellent place to do that. So you can become a poll worker. Guess what? The average age of poll workers is about 80 years old. So I'm not throwing shade on mature people like me, but we have to pass on the torch, those of us who do those things. And so younger people, you know, get involved. Being an election judge. There's something called election protection. It's a national organization. And if you are interested right now, if you go to www.protectthevote.net, you can volunteer. And volunteering would be not contactless. Contactless is helping at a poll place where you would be doing field support. So a roving poll monitor just means that you'll be in your car and you're just going from poll place to poll place. You'll be given an assignment to go to certain places. And it even as a poll place monitor, they're looking for people to stand and hold a sign, not real interaction with people, but promote the 866R vote number. What happens when you call that 866R vote number, it is directly to lawyers, paralegals, and law students. And when they answer the phone, they can, they take down your information and they are very intentional about what they put down. And if something egregious is happening at a particular poll place and it just continues to happen, then what they'll do is contact the election authority and ask them to shut it down or to do something to fix it. And if they don't, they will find a judge and get it shut down. And so the roving poll people, what they do, they'll just go using a tablet or their cell phone and they'll just report anything they see. Like if they see police presence, a lot of police presence, or they see some people that something just doesn't look right, you don't stop them, you call that number. They have social media monitoring. Social media, oh my goodness, it's nonstop. And so they're training for that. Then, like I said, you know, responding to incoming calls. You could develop a campaign to drive people to the polls if you like. Again, you know, that's something that's more direct contact. So, you know, you have to go with your comfort level on that. You can organize Twitter storms. So whatever it is that's going on, you can just tweet about it. But what you don't want to do is pass on bad information. If it seems like it's misinformation or bad information, you want to report that. You can host webinars. You can do things if you're, I don't know if you're living in the dorms or how you're doing that, but you can have different kinds of things. But the bigger thing here for me that I think that that you'd want to consider is to begin plans on a Vote 2022 campaign, because it's coming. And if that race is going to be just as important as this current race is. And so, you know, that's another way to get involved. And the last thing I'll say about this is run for office. Do you have any idea how many social workers have they're legislators at the federal level? They're at least, last time I counted, about 6 that were social workers or have a social work background or something like that. And who better than social work to understand the needs of people and have their best interests, and to be a legislator or a congressperson or something to that effect. There is, I mentioned the Good Trouble Voter Awareness March. We did this here. And like I said, there are some other places. I wanted you to see the thing. Now, election results. I think I better stop. It's 5:19. But just, this is the last thing I'm going to say to you. This isn't a normal election, everybody, because of COVID. And so we may not know the results of the election. What I would encourage you to do is just recognize that and just hold on and be patient. I know that this is a lot. I know that it can be a little scary in thinking about what's going to happen, But we all are going to have to be patient because we are not going to know the results on November the 3rd. And yeah, I'm going to stop there. Let's see if anybody has questions.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time and expertise here from the Department of Social Work, the Center for Social Justice Education, and of course the College of Liberal Arts. We really appreciate it. We do have a few questions. I think you've addressed a couple of these. That the slide that you just had up, the first question here is, other than voting ourselves and encouraging others to vote, what can we do to help? So that slide you just showed toward the end there, it was a great kind of summary. I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
No, I would say too, if you're going to go and help and be part of like election protection, and I would really encourage you not to just go on your own, but to be part of something like election protection. There may be other things in your community that I'm not aware of, because you're part of a unit, you're part of a team, and there are rules and ways in which to handle situations. And I really don't want you to just be out there by yourself, but I would encourage you to, like I've got a big cooler I'm gonna take with water, and we've gotten people to donate PPE, and there are places that are gonna donate food. So I'll be around to help, pass out PPE, pass out food, rove around, those sorts of things. And, you may just want to pick up the phone and call people and remind them, hey, starting today, are you ready? Do you have a plan? The social media, if you're a social media person, I think they really need people for that. So again, you can do that by signing up with protectthevote.net.
Great, thank you. We have two more questions that are kind of overlapping, so I'm going to read them both and let you respond. The first one says, I live in Kentucky and grew up in Arkansas, which are both safe Republican states. I've heard a lot of people from these kinds of states talk about how it feels hopeless to vote when your state is a safe state for the other political party. Does the Electoral College discourage people from these states from voting? That's the first one. And then the second question is, what do you tell someone who is disillusioned with the voting process due to the Electoral College results with the last election?
I say vote. I still say vote. Even though we have this Electoral College process, those electoral votes are still determined by the number of votes and how people vote. So if, first I would say, understand the electoral process in your state, because everyone is slightly different. Some states, if you have 20 electoral votes, it all goes to one person, but in some states, 10 may go here, 5 may go there. Understand that process. But at the end of the day, electors are supposed to do their vote based on the number of people, based on who people vote for. So if the majority is one way, then that's who they should be lending their support to. That's who they should be voting for with their electoral vote. So the answer still is vote.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
The next question here says, thanks so much for your presentation. You mentioned distinct forms of racial discrimination with the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. Could you please elaborate on that?
Let's see, what did I say about those? Elaborate on like the voter suppression type thing?
It says distinct forms of racial discrimination. And if the person who typed this question wants to add more, I can add that if they respond.
Okay, so other than the things that I mentioned, the felony disenfranchisement, the voter ID law is a big one. The social media that has been persistent in Black communities is another form. When that one section of the Voter Rights Act was taken out in 2013, not only did states go and create laws around voter ID, they also did things like they closed DMV the Department of Motor Vehicle locations. They shut down polling places, and they did this stuff in predominantly Black communities everywhere, not just in the South. But primarily in the South. I hope I answered your question.
All right, thank you. Another question here. Some people only run as a certain party, whether it's Democrat or Republican, in order to get the vote. So if a certain county or state is predominantly blue or red, even if those are not the values they hold. What are your thoughts on that?
Wow, that's a big question. It happens. I'm sure, I know it happens. And what I would say is if that's something that you know about a particular candidate, and let me just say this, there are no perfect candidates. I don't care whether we run for president or for dog catcher. No one's perfect. But what you're voting for is, your voting is based on conditions. So what are the conditions in which you're living? What are the conditions in which you want change? And the person that can support those things or those conditions that you want changed is the person you'd want to vote for. So with that particular person, if you know that their values don't match what's coming out of their mouth, then you could host a candidate forum and ask them real specific questions about that, so that you can really have them on record in terms of what they're saying, and maybe that could make a difference. But that's a hard nut to crack. In where I live at here in St. Louis, it's a Democratic city. It's like 90% Democrat, but I know that many of them are not Democrats. They're Democrats, just what you just said. They're running as Democrats because they want to be in office. And that it's unfortunate, but that's the reality. The other thing I would say is run for office. Get them out of there. Run, be true to yourself and run.
Good point. Another question. If we remove the voter ID requirements, how do you propose ensuring against voter fraud?
So, okay. So I see the thing about such as deceased people voting. The incidences of voter fraud are like practically non-existent. So does it happen from time to time? Yeah, it does, but it doesn't happen a lot. Let me give you an example of voter fraud. Let's say we're talking about impersonation. So if with voter ID, so if I'm registered to vote in this county or at this precinct, then what I literally have to do is go change my look, my clothes and everything, and get in a car and drive way someplace else to try to, in another state or something like that, to vote. Who's gonna do that? I don't want to make light of it, because there is a very, very small percentage of it, but it just doesn't happen the way in which people are saying that it happens. If it did, you would have heard about this way before this particular election. It just, in the movie Rigged, there's a part in there where that movie Rigged is based on the documentary on 4 different states, and one of the states is Texas. So this one guy got arrested for voter fraud. What happened in that instance was that he has the exact same name as his grandfather. So he goes in. He had been, I think he had been a prisoner or something. But anyway, he goes to the poll place. He asked the poll worker, could he vote? He asked. And what happened is that the poll worker looked up and said, oh, sure, you can vote. But the poll worker didn't look at the date of birth. He has the same exact name as his grandfather. And so he showed his ID and they allowed him to vote. In terms of ID, what I'm talking about is strict voter ID, a picture ID that is from the federal government. So what voter ID law typically does is, if you're a student and you don't have an ID, you should be able to use your student ID with your picture on it, right? Well, part of the reason why voter ID has been pushed so much is it's not just a thing against people that can't afford to do it, so they're trying to get rid of the, low-income people, but it's also a thing against students. They don't want students to have the ability to vote because they assume that students vote in a block as Democrats, and that's not necessarily true. But at the end of the day, the idea is the fewer people you have voting, the better it is for the powers that be, the people that are currently in power, because they want to stay in power. They want to think for you.
All right, thank you. I'll go ahead and stop. We have just a couple more questions, but I'll stop right there and let our department chair in social work, Christy Baker, wrap things up for us.
I would like to start by thanking Dr. McClendon for joining us. The times that we're living in, this is a very timely and very much needed topic. And so thank you for your knowledge, for your sharing, for you giving us ideas about how to move forward in working with our students and our community citizens. I would like to especially thank Alyssa Mitchell. Dr. Mitchell is the current director of our Center for Social Justice. Dr. Wendy Turner, who is a full professor and has been in the past the director of our Center for Social Justice. I'd like to thank Christina Arwood, who helped with our publicizing of this event, and the Berger family that provides the funding for the annual sponsoring of this. I'd like to close by saying a statement that I've heard over and over and over again from a person who lives in Georgia, and it's vote as if our lives depend on it. As social workers, as citizens, our votes will set forth the next, I would say, decade of policies as they impact human services, human needs, everything that we fight for, from economic to electoral to the environmental and climate justice issues. What we are dealing with in this election will be majorly impacted. So please vote as if not just our lives, but the quality of our lives depends on it. And with that, we are finished.